Hello there, welcome or welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi, my name is Samantha, and this is my channel where I talk all about books. Anyway, today I'm coming to you with a long overdue video, oops. Today I'm coming to you with my April wrap-up, even though I'm currently filming this on the 29th of May. Yes, May was a bit of a crazy month, and I kept on thinking, okay, I'll film this video on my next day off, on my next day off, on my next day off, and here we are. It's the end of the month and I still haven't filmed the video. But I actually wanted to film a separate April wrap-up just because I think I had a really good reading month in April, and you know what, I think it deserves its own video. I'm sorry that I'm going to be posting two wrap-ups very close together, but I wanted to film them separately, so here we are. We're going to film my April wrap-up today and probably my May wrap-up today as well, but you're not going to see that for a little while. As I have been intending to do, I'm going to start off this video with my monthly stats. These are just the stats that Storygraph compiles for me every month. Anyway, yeah, so I'll start off with my monthly stats according to Storygraph. So as you can see, I read a total of 9 books in April, which is pretty good. I'm quite happy with that. I read just shy of 2,000 pages and I listened to 6.43 hours of audiobook, which is not too bad. My biggest mood section was lighthearted, emotional, and adventurous. Next, we're moving on to the pacing. So 25% of the books I read were fast-paced, 63% were medium-paced, and 13% were slow-paced books. In terms of page number, I had 5 books that were under 300 pages, which I think were probably the graphic novels, and then 2 books were between 300 and 499 pages, which is typically my average. I normally read books that are in that range. And then I had 1 book which was over 500 pages. In terms of audiobooks, I only listened to 1 audiobook and it was less than 8 hours. In terms of my fiction to nonfiction ratio, I read 8 fiction books and 1 nonfiction book, which is just on par for what I want. I'm trying to read 1 nonfiction book a month. Moving on to genres. So my most read genre was manga and fantasy because they were fantasy mangas. And then I read 2 literary novels, 1 children's book, 1 classic, 1 magical realism, romance, memoir, and historical. In terms of format, I had 1 audiobook and 8 print books. In terms of my rating, I had 2 books which I didn't give a rating to, although I actually have now since rated 1, I just haven't rated it on Storygraph. I had 1 2-star, 1 3.5, 2 4, 1 4.25, 1 4.5, and 1 5. As you can see by this graph, in terms of days that I read or listened to audiobooks, I was pretty consistent with my reading, although I did have some days where I didn't read anything, which is something I'm trying to work on. But overall, I was pretty consistent and read pretty much every day. So yeah, not too shabby. Let's move on to actually talking about the books. So if you didn't know, in my wrap-ups, I normally go from worst to best because I think that's the most interesting format for me personally. I used to always do chronological, but I think that's kind of boring. I normally go in terms of my rating, although I'm actually going to start off with a book that I didn't rate, and that's not because I didn't like it, it's because it's a memoir, and to me it feels very weird to rate someone's memoir. Absolutely no shade if you do rate memoirs, I just don't typically rate them. Anyway, so with that being said, the first book I'm going to talk about is not one that I didn't like, it's just I didn't rate it, and that book was I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This book is a very difficult read. It is basically Jennette McCurdy opening up all about her experience being a child actor, being sort of forced into it by her mother, who was emotionally abusive, and sort of all of the trauma that came with that. Like I said, I didn't give it a rating because it felt weird to rate something so personal, but it was definitely eye-opening because I think if you watch iCarly or whatever, I don't think you would never think that's something that's going on behind the scenes. It just goes to show that you really don't know what is going on with someone. Massive trigger warning for eating disorders. I knew that that was going to be a big part because of somebody else's review, but I think a lot of people don't mention it necessarily. But if that's something that's going to be difficult for you to read, do not read this. It goes into very graphic detail about her eating disorder, and if that's something you're not going to be able to handle, don't read this book. Just skip it. But it was very well done. I don't want to say I enjoyed it because I didn't necessarily enjoy it, but I'm glad that I read it. And now we're going to move on to actual ranking worst to best. So the next book I'm only going to talk about briefly because I did actually talk about this in my March wrap up because I finished this book on the 1st of April and I hadn't filmed that wrap up by that point. So I just went ahead and talked about it in that video. So I just want to talk about it very briefly here because I already feel bad because I didn't like this book and it's super popular. Anyway, that book is Babel by R F Kuang. Babel, whatever it is. This book didn't do it for me. I thought it was really boring, didn't like it. It was a struggle for me to get through. I gave it 2 stars and we're gonna move on. That's all I'm gonna say about it. I don't want to stir anything else up, but I will link my March wrap up in the card and down below in case you wanted to go and watch that and find out like more detailed thoughts. That book wasn't for me. The next book that I read was actually a reread of a childhood favorite. I decided to reread Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. I read this book as a child, obviously, and I, in my mind, had such a clear memory of this book, and I saw it at the library, and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna reread that book because I want to see if I can actually remember that book as clearly as I think I can, because like it had been a good, I'd say 15 years since I had read that, and I had such a clear image of the book in my head. Turns out I could actually remember a lot of it, which was wild. And I just found it interesting rereading books that I loved as a child and seeing like, why did I love this so much? I didn't love it as much as an adult because it felt very short, but obviously it's a children's book. Like it's difficult because you don't want to bore a child. You want to keep their attention. It's got to be short and snappy. But for me personally, I think that the ending could have been fleshed out a lot more. I haven't actually told you what the book is about. This book basically follows our main character, Winnie Foster, and Winnie is an only child. She lives kind of on the outskirts of town right by this wood, which her family owns, but she's never actually gone into it because her parents are very protective of her. But one day, Winnie is so bored. It's one of the hottest days of the year, and she's sick and tired of just sitting outside the front of her house, and so she decides she's gonna go into the wood. And when she's in the wood, she sees a boy drinking from this weird spring, which nobody knew was even there. Anyway, this is how she meets the Tuck family, who drank from this spring like, I don't know, 50 years ago or something like that, and realized that it has actually made them immortal. And so this starts off a very weird sort of series of events where Winnie gets kidnapped by them and they explain everything about their lives, and she's kind of deciding, is that something that I would want for myself? It was an interesting one. There were certain parts that I remembered very clearly and other parts which I thought, how on earth did I like this that much as a kid? Because that is weird and very questionable behavior. Anyway, for those reasons, I ended up giving it 3 stars. And I don't think I'll reread it again in the future. The next book that I read, it was actually the first book in a series that I read the second book of in February because it's a romance book. So it's the first book in a romance series, which I feel like it never really matters if you read those out of order because we all know how the book is going to end up anyway. It's not really a spoiler, so I don't really care if I read those out of order. But that book was Set on You by Amy Lea. This is the first book in, I think it's called the Influencer series. The first book basically follows a like a Fitstagrammer. Second book, it follows a Bookstagrammer, and in the third book, it's going to follow their friend who does makeup on Instagram and stuff like that. This book follows our main character, Crystal, and she basically is a personal trainer, and she runs her Instagram talking about body positivity and fitness and being a curvy girl. One day at the gym, she's setting up to use her favorite squat rack, and then this horrible guy comes and uses her squat rack, and she calls him squat rack thief, and she basically hates his guts, and then they kind of start this feud, and then it kind of turns into a romance from there. I've forgotten the love interest's name. Like I said, this is the first book in the series. The second book is X's and O's, and I really enjoyed X's and O's. I gave that like 4.5 stars, I think. I loved that. I had a really fun time with it. This one was not as good in my opinion. I don't know what it was, but I just was not vibing with this one as much. Obviously, this was her first book, so obviously her writing is gonna grow a bit more. But yeah, this one was just like, it was fine. I already can't remember the love interest's name, which is really bad. Whereas with X's and O's, that's stuck in my mind a lot more. So yeah, I ended up giving this one a 3.5 stars. Still a fun time, but I think her writing is getting better as she goes along. So yeah, I'll definitely still read the third book as well whenever that comes out. There's a fun, sexy time if you're interested in that. Although actually, this one had a lot more like sex in public places, which was a little bit weird and not my vibe, but depends what you are interested in reading. The next 4 books I want to talk about are all part of a manga series. Basically, one day in the library, somebody returned this adorable looking manga called Beyond the Clouds, and I saw it and I thought, that is literally so pretty and so cute. Like, I really want to read this book. So I borrowed it, and the next day I woke up, I made myself a cup of coffee, I sat down and I read the book while I was drinking my coffee, and it was the most magical, beautiful, wholesome experience. I loved that book so much. So yes, I read the first book in Beyond the Clouds, and this series basically follows our main character Theo, who is 16 years old and he's an orphan. He's living with his sort of found family in the workshop that he works in, and one day he goes to what he calls the land of dreams, something like that. Basically it's a junkyard, but he goes there and he finds like lost treasure and things like that. Anyway, he goes there one day and he finds this little girl who has fallen from the sky, and she doesn't remember anything. She's also got wings, but she's actually missing a wing. He's kind of like, where on earth has she come from? What can I do for her? And Theo has always dreamed of going on adventures. He's always loved books and stories, and one day Mia gets sick and basically he has to go on some adventures to save her life. From there onwards, the series kind of follows them just trying to figure out where Mia has come from and if they can get her back. The first book is by far my favorite. It is so wholesome and cute and just fun and light. I love it. I love that book so much. It is like having a nice warm hug. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. It's like having a hug. That was the first book. The rest of the series I haven't enjoyed as much. I gave volume 1 5 stars. I gave volume 2 4 stars. Volume 3 4.5. And I gave volume 4 4 stars. And there is a 5th volume which is coming out later this year and I cannot wait. And that will be the final volume, I believe. I would say the first one is the best, but I enjoyed the series as a whole. It was really a good old time. Anyway, and the last book I have to talk about is another reread actually. One day I was watching a video from Mel from the Bookish Mel. Of course, who else? Anyway, I was watching one of her videos and she had reread Daisy Jones and the Six in preparation for the TV show. And she also did some videos where she reacted to the episodes. So I'll link her whole Daisy Jones and the Six series down below if you've read everything and watched everything and you want to check it out. So yeah, I'll link her channel down below. Anyway, I watched her video where she reread Daisy Jones and the Six and I thought, you know what? Maybe I should reread Daisy Jones and the Six, because the first time I read that book, I didn't really like it that much. I remember kind of being like, why is this book so hyped? I don't understand. And I gave it 3.5 stars the first time I read it. Anyway, this time around, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I'm older and I enjoy adult books more than I did back then when I first read it. Because I think I read it in 2019 where I was still quite a YA girly. Whereas now I'm not really a YA girly at all. But I think that might be part of the reason. Anyway, but yes, I reread it and I loved it. I do think that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes a really good story. She does such a good job with characters. Like, they feel so realistic. Like, you want to Google them and find out all about their lives. You feel like it's a real person, and then you're like, oh no, that's not a real person. Like, this is all fictional, but like they just feel so real. And yeah, that's the same with Daisy Jones and the Six. Her writing is pretty damn good. It's very readable, very compelling. But if you didn't know what this book is about somehow, this book basically follows a fictional band called the Six and this woman called Daisy Jones. And it follows these people in the 70s, and Daisy Jones is trying to kind of make it on her own, and the Six, they're doing pretty well, but they kind of realize that if they put the Six and Daisy Jones together, then they can do even better. So yes, Daisy Jones and the Six is born. It follows the band throughout the creation of the band and their albums and their tours, all culminating in their last ever show and sort of the fallout of the group. And it's told in an interview format, which is really interesting, and the audiobook is so good. Full cast audiobook, although I have to say I found the narrator for Daisy to be a little bit annoying, but apart from that, it's really great. I read this physically and also listened to the audiobook a little bit, but yeah, I had such an amazing time with this time around. Like, I almost cried at the end. I was getting teary. I just loved this. I think also maybe part of the reason is that I am very much into music, just listening to music. Like, I don't play any instruments or sing or anything like that. I don't maybe have the best music taste ever either, but like, I like my music taste, obviously. Yeah, I am the type of person, I'm always listening to music and I really love it, and I love kind of a mix of everything. So yeah, I don't know. I think I have a much better appreciation for music now than maybe I used to. And so I think that also kind of helped me enjoy this more because, you know, it is about music. I think I felt their passion for music a lot more this time around. And all in all, I just had a great time reading it. It's a very emotional one as well. It deals a lot with addiction, so definitely be warned about that. I really enjoyed my time rereading this book, and I gave it 4.5 stars. But yes, those are all of the books that I read in the month of April. I'm very happy with my reading month in April, as you can probably tell. I think I had a really great reading month, you know? I had mostly 4 stars and up. Grand old time, and I read a lot. But yes, those are all the books that I read in April. So please let me know what you've read recently down below, and let me know what your favorite book that you've read recently is. I would love to know. And if you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a cloud emoji for Beyond the Clouds. But yes, that's all that I have for this video, so I hope you liked it. If you did, please give a thumbs up. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe down below, and I will have another video very soon, so I will see you then. Bye!
You in the backyard and you're all fine in the summer. Stay there for 3 weeks where we learn to wrote you a letter, sent a message to the that day. Skip to the present.